Hi there, it's Rachel Greig, and in this video I'm going to be using the Wild Waves background stamp. You can see there it's quite a large stamp that does actually fit over the top of an A6 card front, so that's 10 centimeters by 15 centimeters. What I'm stamping it onto here though is some hot press Fabriano watercolor paper. This is a really nice thick 300 GSM paper, watercolor paper that's smooth, so it doesn't have the usual like texture or ripples that you would see on a cold press watercolor paper. And I use the hot press for the stamping for this one, so you can still see all the lines in the background stamp, so it won't have any problem with any kind of texture. So it's just a smooth little nice watercolor pad. And what I've done is I've stamped it up using the distressed embossing ink. So this is just a clear ink that you can use to emboss with, and I've embossed it with some clear embossing powder, so you can just see there how now the stamping is all shiny. So the clear just means it's a clear embossing on the white paper or the white cardstock, so it's just basically white on white, so it's a little bit difficult to see. You can just make out the background design there though. And now what I'm doing is I want to do a watercolor resist, and I'm just using some distress inks. And I've put the distress inks on that acrylic block, and I've just done a couple of different colours. The colours I'm doing are Broken China, Mermaid Lagoon, and I did a little bit of Salty Ocean and a little bit of Evergreen Bow. So the Evergreen just adds that little greeny look to it as well, because I wanted it to be not just blue but kind of more like the ocean, so it's got those nice little greeny colours in there as well. You can see that I'm just doing a little bit on the right hand side because I want the background to be a bit like varied in its colour, a bit of blue, bit of green, bit of lighter blue, a bit of darker areas, and it does a nice little resist. So what the distress inks do, because they're water-based, they will resist that embossing design. So everything that's been embossed with that embossing powder, because it's now like a raised effect, it will then it will then resist the ink. So the ink will go around all the other areas, and that stamp design will show through nice and clear. And what I've done there is just added a little bit of splattering, so just with some excess ink there, just put it onto the tip of my pen and then just tapping the pen just so those splatters go over the page, just to give it a bit more of a wash look, like an ocean wave look to it. And the distress ink is really good for doing some watercolor resist. And what I'm doing now is using the Wild as the Sea quote stamp and stamping it up using that same distress embossing ink and onto that same watercolor paper. So when you're doing your embossing, you can use a little anti-static cloth, and that will mean that you don't, if you don't want any excess little flyaway embossing particles, if you just want it to be nice and clean. But you can see here just at the A, see the A, how there's a little bit of embossing powder that's still sticking to the cardstock. That's what you would avoid if you used a anti-static cloth, but I didn't use one, and it means that a couple of areas have got that extra embossing powder onto it. And you can wipe that away with a brush, but I've decided to leave it because for me it kind of looked like whitewash that you would get from an ocean. So I have a little bit of it on the right hand side of that A on that C word, and also a little bit under the B in the Brave. And I kind of think for this quote stamp it works really well, just giving you that little wash. It looks like wind-swept whitewash, so I think that's a really cool, sort of like a mistake that worked out really well in my favour. Anyway, so what I'm doing now is I'm just going to die cut it using a little stitch die. Now this stitch die is from Stampin' Up. I can't remember the name. It's probably just called Stitched Frames or something like that, but I'll see if I can find out the name and I'll put it in the description box below. And so I've done my background panel, and I've just folded a white card front. This is just an A5 card front, and just folded it in half, and now putting my background panel on top. So if you were just doing a folded watercolor card, you wouldn't need to be doing this process here. You would just simply be stamping on the front of a watercolor card. But because I'm just using a plain white card base and then putting this watercolor panel over the top. I'm just going edge to edge for that, trimmed it out, and then now you can see that nice little background. And I've left the white at the top of the background stamp, just white, so it's kind of like the horizon, like the skyline. So now I'm just adding the quote stamp on top using a little bit of foam tape, and now my card is complete. So that's just one little way you can use this background stamp and this quote. It's really fun with the embossing resist. We've got plenty more ideas using these stamps on our blog and our website, which you can check out at darkroomdoor.com. Thanks so much for watching.